Hi, everyone. Just a quick note before the episode. I had a problem with my audio. It's only on my voice. The guest sounds fine, but I tried a bunch of things and I was not really able to fix it. There was some, AI filters that I tried, but they just made it sound really weird. So I'm just going to put it out with the kind of bad audio. So anyway, I am aware that it sounds bad, but enjoy it anyway. Thanks. Welcome, everyone. This is the Granite Mountain Movie Club. Today I'm joined by a first-time guest. He goes by Charles, and you might have to, you might know him online. What's your handle? I'm not actually sure how to read it.
Yeah, it was funny. I don't know how to read it either exactly. I think it's an I on the end. For OPSEC
It looks like
reasons.
an I, yeah.
Yeah, for OPSEC reasons, I just kind of just came up with something random. But I think it's Jif Joff I with an I at the end.
Oh, you just threw that out. You just came up with that.
Yeah. I just really wanted to stay away from any obviously identifying information. I didn't really know a bunch how Twitter worked either when I signed up, so I
Yeah.
didn't. I had no idea it would actually be important.
Yeah. Well, I've been, seeing your stuff forever. We're in at least one group chat that's the same. And I think you generally you're into, I think you're kind of a tech guy. I think I've seen you post a lot about like statistics and maybe AI. I don't know if you're like into AI or whatever, but that's kind of your lane, right?
Yeah, I'd say that's right. I work as a research scientist, basically in data science, at one of the few large, one of the larger tech companies. But yeah, this is really my passion, talking about film, movies. Really love the Western genre, which we're about to get into here in a few minutes. But yeah, books, history, sports, so a little bit of everything.
Yeah. Um, and so I mentioned, I think we're in this group chat together. And like in that particular group chat, I'm in a couple different ones that are sort of movie focused. But this one, everyone in this one is probably quite a bit smarter than me, and the people write these like reviews they're long, but they're like incredibly thoughtful. They're incredibly detail oriented, just like really insightful people in that chat. So I think you're the first person from that chat to be on the show. So welcome. And then we're going to be talking about a movie that you had brought up a couple times and you had really praised. I had always liked it, but I don't think I appreciated it to the extent that I do now. But we're going to be talking about the assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford, which Andrew Dominic film from 2007. What is it about this movie that you've been so interested in for so long?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of things. So this was another 2007 juggernaut. It's hard to talk about this movie without talking about the whole year of 2007 in general.
Mm,
But it was a little bittersweet reminiscing too, because I know you like to ask guests, where they first saw this movie and everything. And I was thinking back, and I was just blown away by how often I used to go to the movies back then. Um, 2007 was kind of the cultural swan song of the film industry. I mean, it was just an absolute explosion of great films, not only top heavy and like a handful of masterpieces. Like I think it was like Zodiac, The Assassination of Jesse James, No Country for Old Men, There Will Be Blood, but also like the breadth of films. Like if you look up, I think like like the 30th best film that year or whatever, you
mm-hmm.
get, I mean, you get stuff like Into the Wild or Shaun of the Dead, or just like stuff that you would actually probably get up and go to the theaters if they were out today. So I don't know what was going on. That was kind of there's been some really great stuff after that too. But yeah, it was just an absolute swan song event, just explosion of greatness. And I saw that in the theaters. And this is interesting. This one had a lot of walkouts too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's something I haven't seen that in a while, honestly, where people walk out of the theater. But it was one of those films where there's pretty big mismatch of expectations versus what you're getting, and I think expectations, understandably, was it was a Western. Um, it was about Jesse James. It was starring Brad Pitt. And I think what people got was something quite different. It was an art house film that was largely a psychological character drama. It was about the Western myth. I don't even know if rewatching it recently, I don't even know if I would call this a Western, to be completely honest. It was about the Western myth. the it was firing on all cylinders. First of all, yeah, you can't talk about this movie without talking about the cinematography. Just absolutely gorgeous. I think Roger Deakins, I think, yeah, he did No Country for Old Men too, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, those two films in one year are insanely impressive. But yeah, in the theaters, this film was absolutely gorgeous. um just stunning cinematography. The acting was out of this world. We can talk more about this later, but yeah, the Robert Ford character, which is yeah, Casey Affleck, I think stole the show. And again, on the rewatch, I think the movie is really about the Robert Ford character. Something a little bit more obvious this time when I watched it. But yeah, I think I was just stunned and blown away by all facets of the movie. The cinematography is one of the best in thinking the 21st century. The acting was top notch. The narrative drama. So just on a basic surface level, it has the Shakespearean force of narrative drama about friendship and betrayal and resentment and identity and all these things that the movie plays out kind of like a stage drama, which is interesting because Deadwood is also like that too, and it's also one of my other favorite westerns and favorite works of all time.
Yeah,
Um,
the thing about 2007 as well is, um, just going back to that for a second, it was also a big year for this like Western, and then we can get into this thing as to whether Jesse James is a Western or not. But yeah, they had No Country for Old Men, Jesse James, 310 to Yuma, and I think there was a couple smaller ones. There was the Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. Um, but yeah, it was kind of a big Western movie as a Western year as well. Yeah, just really, and this one kind of. I mean, you mentioned the walkouts. It flopped quite badly. I think it didn't. It made about half as much as its budget,
oh wow.
and yeah, it probably, yes, in part because it maybe wasn't a Western. It didn't have some of the elements that people going to the movies would have hoped for. And it's quite long, it's,
Yeah, yeah.
and as long as it is, it apparently there is a much longer cut. The initial cut they submitted to the studio was like 3 hours.
Oh wow.
This one's 240, but then there's apparently a one that's more like 3.5 or 4, which I don't know if anyone has seen really, but apparently that exists. Sorry though, I cut you off. What were you saying?
No, no, that makes a lot of sense. No, I think they did the right thing cutting it down to 2 hours and 40 minutes. Yeah, I can understand the walkouts actually. It was probably much different than people were expecting. It was much different than I was expecting. I was floored by it, but yeah, I don't know if I really knew what to expect. I think back in those days there's enough really good movies where I just loosely, like, based on word of mouth or reviews, would just go see stuff, right?
Yeah,
I don't do as much these days, and I was blown away. But I could definitely see. I don't know how it was marketed. Now that you mention it, I don't know if I can recall the trailer, but I think just simply by the fact that it was a Western that had Brad Pitt, there's some probably pretty large mismatch in expectations there.
yeah, I think so. Because and we can get into. Let's kind of describe what it is really about. Like you get the film opens up, and there's this voiceover. There's a lot of voiceover, which some people will say is like you're not supposed to do that. That's not. But I don't. Um, I've always kind of been of the opinion like maybe you shouldn't do it, but if you do it and it works, then it's fine, and it works here. But there's this long voiceover. I think the beginning is very engaging, but and there's this initial in the first 15 minutes or something. There's this train heist, which is one of the best looking night scenes ever, and But then from there, after this big train heist where the Jesse James gang, they stop a train in the middle of the night and they break in, they rob it, they rob the people on the train. After that, there's like there's some gunfire throughout the movie, but there's not really any more action for another 2 hours and 30 minutes.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. And yeah, and that first part is really interesting too, because like you said, first of all, yeah, this train robbery is one of the most beautiful scenes I've seen in the theaters.
And
Like
that's
it's
where
just,
your profile picture is from. I didn't realize that until
oh
this
yeah,
rewatch.
I forgot about that actually. You just reminded me. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I was floored in the theater by that scene. It was just stunning. And this is a movie with the cinematography that I think is very consciously aping Terrence Malick, and it does it in a way. When usually you describe like, oh, this is like Terrence Malick, it means this is pretentious and long tracking shots
And
and
dreamy, usually
yeah,
dreamy.
and try like pretentious and poetic. But here it's done in a way that the cinematography and what he does matches the themes so extremely well, and that it also has the part that is missing. I'm a huge Malick fan, but I do understand the criticism of Malick that he's kind of missing like an emotional character core, like an emotional core to a lot of his films. I'm sympathetic to that criticism. I'm still a huge fan, but if you watch The Thin Red Line, right, it's these beautiful poetic voiceovers and shots of nature and stuff like that. And some of his films don't quite have the character complexity or emotional core that I think this film successfully pulls off. So I think it was a huge achievement that, he pulled off like some really Malick level cinematography in a way that wasn't just completely superfluous and just beauty for beauty's sake, right? It wasn't just aesthetic nature shots, just not aesthetic nature shots. It was a way that really intertwined the themes of the characters and their psychology and the exploration of the myth versus the reality of Jesse James. They did some interesting thing with the lenses. So yeah, yeah. I can't
Yeah,
remember.
it's very contemplative. There's like a it's definitely slowly paced. It takes its time, lots of breathing room, but it never feels like it's just meandering or um uh yeah, it never feels like it's going into like tone poem or just poetry mode. It always is sort of moving. Yeah, and it's an interesting balance that you don't really see very often, like because it does give a lot of space where they let the music and the visuals do a lot of work, but never too much. Usually when you're doing some of that, you're doing a lot more. But this has an interesting balance.
Yeah, and it's always very purposeful, right? So the opening kind of I don't know how long it was, probably 2 or 3 minutes. The poetic voiceover and the interesting lenses and the background shots. It tells you it actually condenses a lot of information about Jesse James and who he is as a person into that, and it's doing it in a way that sets up the film's themes with with the myth of Jesse James and kind of his brooding psychology and where he's at. And so it's not superfluous at all. It's very intentional. Yeah, and pulled off very well. And that whole opening, you mentioned like the first opening 15 minutes, I thought were great. It's almost the very first few minutes. Almost reminds you of like a history docudrama or something. The
Uh
way he's
huh.
like reciting information and he's doing, going into town and giving handshakes. It almost had like a history channel feel to it, or
Yeah, Ken,
something.
Ken Burns. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And then another great, great scene is when Robert Ford is actually introduced to Jesse James, and they're kind of like, hanging out, waiting for that train robbery. I mean, there's a ton there. First of all, I forgot how eloquent some of the dialogue was, and just really funny. Some of the character interactions. But yeah, the scene also sets up a whole lot with how people treat Jesse versus how people treat Robert. Um, how Robert's kind of invisible to a lot of people. There's a lot of humor. He goes and like introduces himself both James brothers, but the oldest first. And it's so off, like off-putting the way he just goes up to people. And I didn't, realize how funny this was until I watched it. But he goes and starts talking about how he's destined for greatness and, and
Yeah,
like, yeah, and how he's like known all his life. He was going to do great things. And if you only give him a chance to show him, for him to show you his courage and whatever. And people are just react to this like, what the hell are you talking about? You know?
yeah. The older James brother, I think it's Frank James, is sort of like he's like, look, kid, I get a really bad feeling when you're around. Like
Yeah,
I don't like you in my presence at all.
yeah. You
And
don't have
that's
the ingredients, son.
yeah, the ingredients. That's a good part. And then like 10 seconds later, the next scene when Robert's back with Jesse James, he's like, me and your brother just had a real good talk.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh my God, yeah. That was really funny, and also the way like when he first interacts with Jesse and just everyone at this camp, um, he's going in like really hot, talking about how he's destined for great things and everything, and everyone else is kind of just like very in the moment, like shooting the breeze, talking about like women and telling jokes. And his first interaction with Jesse is, like I can't remember what he says, but he goes up to him, does his, I think exactly like what you said, it's real great to talk with your brother Frank, and he tries to, basically butter himself up to Jesse, talking about his greatness and all this. And then Jesse's reaction is basically, do you know there's a woman in Fayette who can suck noodles through her nose? Just like just completely on completely different levels than Robert is. Like everyone is very in the moment, telling jokes, just completely, but he's going in, and he also asks something weird. When he's going in talking about how he wants to prove himself and he's destined for great things, but he has to be a sidekick.
Yeah,
It was a huge contrast.
yeah. So that you need a sidekick or something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Casey Affleck does. He's really good at doing this like loser. I guess I'll say like incel or whatever. I don't know if that's the right energy, but this like loser, kind of autistic or incel guy. He's always looking side to side. He never really wants to look at the people he's talking to exactly. He averts his eyes a lot.
It is. It is. And he does such a great job because you also have a lot of sympathy for this character, right? Um, yeah, he's a little bit, almost Travis Bickle,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Travis Bickle. That's a good. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And because you know what he's going to do already, right? So, yeah, that setup is interesting. But yeah, Casey Affleck just, I think, completely steals the show, and you have a lot of sympathy for him. Um, and,
Well, I
and
think he ends up getting an Oscar nomination, and no one else does. I think maybe just him for the whole movie. And then
yeah,
Deakins and Affleck, I think, are the only ones.
yeah, he got robbed if he didn't win that. Who would
I
have
don't
won it instead
I
that
don't think he
year?
won. I can look it up, but I don't think this movie ended up winning any because No Country and There Will Be Blood took all the awards. Yeah, Best Supporting Actor Casey Affleck nominated but did not win. Deakins nominated, did not win for this. I think he won for No Country, maybe.
I mean, that's unreal that he has those two films in one year. Yeah, I mean, just two all-time greats.
Yeah, he was nominated for both. Although he didn't win either of them.
Oh,
There Will Be Blood
oh, interesting.
ended
Huh.
up winning the cinematography award. I mean, it is somewhat of a democratic process, so it's possible that he split his own vote with having two nominations.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. That was a big, back when it was like, well, I guess some of the categories are still five movies, but yeah, vote splitting used to be kind of a big deal. Like if there's two war films in the same year,
Yeah,
yeah, they could split the vote. Yeah,
yeah, and No Country and There Will Be Blood took all the oxygen for most of the awards that year. So
yeah, I can't remember what I was saying, but yeah, just agree with Casey Affleck. He does a great job just uh, yeah, at this character who's kind of lost, who no one pays attention to, is kind of like the runt, which is interesting on the casting side too, right? Because he's the younger brother of Ben Affleck. I mean, on both sides of this
yeah,
equation, right? Yeah, so he's the younger brother of the legit A-list movie star. So there's probably some real feelings behind the acting job here too. And then Brad Pitt also as the uh, you know mythologized legend is
Mhm.
is interesting acting choice as well on that flip side.
We got into a little bit. Like, do you have any other thoughts on why this? I mean, other than maybe being mismarketed and then being long, and and as much as I love it, you can say it's boring. I mean, I think there's a you could see how a normie audience would see how it's boring. But any other reason that this would have flopped? I think it cost like 50 million and made like 25. Like quite it flopped quite badly.
Yeah, as much as I love the movie, I wish I could say that it shouldn't have flopped, but if anything, I'm kind of surprised that it did as well as it did as well as it has because yeah, my impression is that it is an art house psychological drama. Like it's hey, especially when you're talking about people who, I guess just normal everyday moviegoers, expectations are really important, right? You generally don't see people, yeah, especially with blockbusters or anything like that, go see a movie and have it be completely different from expectations. That doesn't mean that people can't be let down or, have a little bit of a mismatch. But yeah, it's not too surprising given, just some of the basic fundamentals of the movie, like that it's a western or looks like a western. It's starring Brad Pitt and so on, but it turns out to be basically an art house psychological drama.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's right. And yeah, I got the numbers here. It cost 30 and made 15. I
Wow.
Though I heard that it did really really well selling DVDs. People got into it later, which the DVD thing used to be a total boon to the industry. Now they're kind of screwed now that doesn't quite work out that way anymore.
Yeah, that's a little bit of a bummer because I think who was it? Was it Matt Damon in that interview who was
Yeah,
saying that yeah, DVDs are a big reason that there's not as much risk taking. I think there's something probably to that, but that's probably not the only dynamic. Like streaming obviously kind of changes the incentives and the feedback mechanism. Like if you're pumping out streaming content, uh, you don't have the same risk reward incentive that has to get people. It's just content, right? You're not trying to get people that getting up out of their seat, going to a movie. You have to tell people about it. You have to pay for a ticket and all that. Just the fact that you have to get people to the box office already, you have to have something, big or interesting or new. It's a completely different set of incentives and dynamics once you have streaming, and you just have to keep people satisfied enough to keep paying a monthly subscription. So that's a completely different dynamic. And then
yeah,
with the DVD thing, I think he's probably onto something there because in terms of the risk seeking, if you don't have a big showing in the initial box office run, you could aim for award season, or you could aim for like a cult classic word of mouth
yeah,
and completely make up for it with that second windfall. So yeah, I think he's probably onto something with the DVD comment there.
yeah. I think it's generally accepted that it was a really useful risk mitigator. And yeah, and stuff like this would pick up among like film fans, and they would get it, and I'll watch it over and over and pay like $20 or $30 for a DVD or Blu-ray, and yeah, you'd make your money. But um, yeah, and then so I brought up the narration a minute ago. What do you think about the use of narration in this movie?
I thought it worked. Yeah, at the beginning, I thought it was a little odd. Um, Especially like I said, like the beginning kind of reminded me of a History Channel docudrama or something,
Yeah,
historical reenactment. But again, I think it was very intentional, given the film's themes about celebrity and fame and myth and all that. But yeah, it's definitely. I think I agree with what you said. Like, if it doesn't go right, it can go really wrong. But it's like one of those rules, I guess, that you should only break if you really know what you're doing.
yeah. That's my take on it as well. And then what's interesting, I assumed I'd watched like the whole movie, and I'd assumed usually the voiceover is someone who's in the movie.
Yeah.
But then I was like, wait, who is this? Like, who's talking? Like, why? Is this like another actor or something like that? And then uh, I looked it up, and it's just a guy who was one of the editors on the film.
Oh, weird.
He had done a little bit of other acting and narration work, but not much. But so it was an interesting choice. They didn't, bring in some other like, famous voice narration guy for a movie that was going to have so much of it.
Yeah, that is interesting. I think it's probably to add to that historical dynamic. To have that kind of removed voice from the action, dealing with the flipping perspectives and the narration on Jesse's life. So
Yeah. We talked a little bit about. You touched on a bunch of kind of the themes, like what it's really about. Things like it's almost like it's a pretty appropriate movie for. Or a couple things I'm going to get to here. So first of all, we have oddly entered into like a new era of assassination. I don't know if you actually looked at the data. If maybe there's been maybe assassinations are kind of like where they've always been in terms of numbers. But how long ago was it with the Japanese Shinzo Abe? How long ago was he killed? Like 2 years, a year and a half ago, or something? It wasn't that long ago.
yeah, that's a really interesting point. It was only a couple years ago, and it does feel like high profile assassinations are very salient again.
They're back. Yeah, it's like weird.
Yeah,
Like and then
yeah.
they tried. There was one very notable attempt on Trump this summer, literally half an inch or whatever, and then another kind of would be attempt maybe with the guy in the bushes at the golf course, and then yesterday we've got one. This healthcare executive, this health insurance executive was gunned down in the streets of New York City. So yeah, so assassinations are back. I thought it was straight. We planned what this movie weeks ago. So
Yeah, I think there's a ton in this movie that's kind of prefiguring the celebrity culture dynamics and
yeah,
fame and obsession. That's why I said I don't know if that would actually classify this movie as a Western on my latest rewatch.
no, I think you're right because you'd mentioned a couple times that it's like a psychodrama or something like that because it's not about I don't. We talked about this some like 2 episodes ago when we did the proposition, which has some overlap in creative talent on this movie. And but like what is a western? What are the essential elements of a western? And this has western elements for sure. It's the old west, and it's an outlaw, an outlaw story. But there's not really the first 20 minutes are a western kind of like because there's a train heist,
yeah,
but then from there there's no more like scheming really. There's no good white hat black hat stuff. It's just sort of following this gang as they kind of hide and have their own little internal squabbles. Like that's really all it is from there.
yeah. It's really centered on the relationship of Bob and Jesse and his kind of a resentful obsession with Jesse's standing versus his own, and kind of the character dynamics and the paranoia of Jesse, and now that you say it, I think the film probably has more in common with something like Sunset Boulevard than it does with the typical Western.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think that makes sense.
So yeah, I'm curious what else would you say this is like about? Like there's a parasocial this term. I don't know if this term even existed. Maybe it's an old term, but I only learned it within the last few years because of the way people behave online. But parasocial relationships, um, that you have that element where Robert knows all about Jesse James from the time he was a kid and has this mythology built up around him, and then he starts spending every day with him, and the film implies that it's pretty quick that he becomes disenchanted, or at least becomes very mixed up in how in the way he perceived his hero versus the way he actually feels about his hero when he's living with him.
Yeah, I think what the movie has on its mind is the transcendence of the Western myth over the reality. I think there's a kind of, for lack of a better word, Reddit interpretation that you might see in the reviews or analysis, that this is the deconstruction of the Western myth, and I don't think that's quite right. I think there's something to that. If you look at just the basics of the movie and its themes and what it does with the lenses, which we can talk about, in a second here too. But really, the movie is, I mean, this in a pretentious way, is very existential. It has death and fate and kind of the end game on its mind. And it's really about the myth outliving the human flawed character of Jesse. So yeah, I completely disagree with a lot of these analysis, which is like, oh, this is deconstructing the Western myth. It's like, no, the Western myth transcends the actual flesh and blood, flawed, tragic human character that we see assassinated. Um, so I think thematically that is a lot of what's on the film's mind. I think the relationship, but that what you touched on, the parasocial relationship, the prefiguring of celebrity obsession, um, and how he sees Jesse. I mean, he says it outright. There's lines towards the end, but like right before he does the assassination with he meets with the sheriff, he's like, "I've been a nobody all my life, right? And so long
Hmm.
as I can remember, Jesse's been this big, big as a tree, right? I mean, he well, said he's been the tallest poppy, right? The tall poppy syndrome. But yeah, it's a classic resentment story of him, him just kind of feeling this humiliation of not amounting to anything, and then how that gets expressed, and really resenting the how big of a deal Jesse James is. And it's hard to talk about what's on the film's mind also without the importance of the Western myth. And I said kind of prefigures some celebrity culture, but just in terms of the importance of the Western genre, there's an anecdote I like to tell about Eisenhower, where I can't remember if this is in guys, maybe some memoirs or biography I read a while back. Anyways, Eisenhower, when he becomes, supreme commander of the Allied forces in Europe, this is someone who basically reaches the pinnacle of the masculine ideal, right? He's commanding large armies in Europe in World War II. I mean, that is like at the top of the totem pole of the the masculine fantasy, the masculine ideal.
Hmm.
And when he goes to bed every night, he lays his head down and reads these dime store pulp westerns. And he was obsessed with them and loved them. And the reason I tell that story is because it's like, this is someone, like I said, who's basically at, the peak, masculine ideal of commanding, commanding armies and high status role and all that, who's still, a major source of inspiration is he has this boyish fascination with the frontier in the American West and these stories that are told. So it's the entire frontier myth, the Western genre. It looms huge in the American mind itself, especially the masculine American mind, and it's really inescapable. I think that is a lot of what's on the film's mind is the transcendence of that Western myth, and a lot. I think where this idea of like that it's deconstructing the Western comes from, there's some truth to that, but I think it misses the major point, which is the kind of like in what is it, the Man Who Shot Liberty Valance.
Hmm.
Um, the myth is what transcends. The myth is what lasts, right? And you see a lot of these really interesting shots, and the film is obviously interested in setting up this contrast between the mythologized Jesse James and the actual like tragic, flawed human Jesse James, and it does some really interesting things um, with the lenses. I don't know enough about filmmaking to know exactly what they're doing, but it's I don't know if it's like fractured or out of focus or what, but you know what I'm talking about, right? With
Yeah, Deakins used some sort of, he's sort of approximating like old timey lenses or something like that for certain, seems like mostly transitional scenes, maybe often with no dialogue but some with voiceover. He uses these lenses that blur the edges.
yeah, yeah, and there's a lot of really fascinating shots in the film. Uh, where it's like they're riding horses and the top of the window shows like the image clearly, but the bottom is like out of focus. Or they're in a field somewhere or something, and the center is in focus. And as you move out from the center, it sort of distorts the focus of like through the lens, like you can't see clearly. So yeah, this is another, I guess, cinematographic trick that really meshes well with what the film is trying to do and the film's themes, and contrasting this kind of myth of Jesse James with the real life human person.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not. Yeah, I'm curious. Yeah, I think the lens thing was partly. Um, yeah, it was partly kind of a I don't know about perception or something like that about how things become hazy. I'm not exactly sure. That's maybe a weak sort of.
No, that's exactly how I read it. Right, it's like some parts are in focus, some parts are out of focus. Um, yeah, but yeah, I don't think what the film is trying to do is saying, oh, look at this, the myth is just untrue. There's a real there's a real flawed human being that isn't anything like the myth. I think that's obvious, right? It's not like nobody really thinks that, like, oh, these myths and stories are 100% accurate, and that somehow deconstructing them or reveal or insightful to say, no, actually, the person was flawed. Like, that's not like super insightful.
Well, the movie is interesting too, and I think the actual history. I think it's basically true to the history where Jesse James for this funny, Americans like outlaws, we like folk heroes and things like that. Um, Jesse James wasn't really a folk hero, in my opinion. There was some sort of attempt to like imply that he like stole from the rich to give to the poor, but I don't think he did. I think he just stole
Yeah,
and kept.
yeah.
um, and I asked, so I did that episode about the proposition recently. So I asked the two guys who were on there, Vandy and Bandy, a little bit about Jesse James's like reputation at the time, and Vandy said something along the lines of, "Well, there was a lot of resentment around the railroads and the trains because they had, some of the practices of like the train." The train owners, they'd buy up all this land and they'd cause problems. Like they'd distort the market, for land value and stuff like
Yeah.
that. And so there was a lot of resentment, and then they would like kind of sell things back to people at exorbitant prices or something like that. So there was this sympathy for someone like Jesse James, to be a train robber. But that's like the extent that to me, just in my very brief reading of history, like there's not much other case for him to be like a folk hero. And so it's funny to me in the movie, and I think this is being accurate to the history, but people have this weirdly positive association with Jesse James, and then they hate the guy who kills him, even though, like, and this is my, like, I don't know if it's a hot take or whatever, like, I sympathize and root for Robert Ford basically the whole movie. I'm kind of with him. and and then they like and then they celebrate the guy who kills Robert Ford, who's even like a bigger loser, it seems like, than Robert Ford. So
Yeah, yeah. I definitely, yeah. I mean, it's hard to argue with, right? Casey Affleck does such a good job, and the character is just very sympathetic. I don't think you're not
I
supposed
wondered.
to.
I think a lot of people. I don't know. Maybe I think that might be us because we're like, on this sort of weird part of the internet. I think maybe we might seem that way, but I think a lot of people who watch this see him as like just pathetic and disgusting. Like
Yeah,
they see him like, yeah, he is the coward Robert Ford.
yeah, I don't think those things are necessarily exclusive, even. And I think that's part of what works so well is that it's hard not to. This sounds really messed up, but it's hard not to see, like, I see a little bit of myself in Robert Ford. Like it, it's. I'm not saying like I'm that disillusioned or anything like that, but Casey Affleck does such a good job that, yeah, I think it's hard not to have some sympathy for the character and understand what he's going through. And especially like I mentioned, a lot of this prefiguring of celebrity, uh celebrity and just celebrity culture in the US. Also, like you said, this parasocial relationships on social media, but also this just kind of, I guess, who is it? I think Zero HP wrote an interesting thread one time about how there's this relationship when you become a big account. I'm not a big account, so I wouldn't know. um, where, like, if people if you don't pay attention to certain people, they'll actually kind of U-turn and start to hate you and get really nasty towards you.
Hmm.
If you don't, and so like even just that little relationship you can already see in the movie, um, between these two types of people.
Yeah, and so real quick, I think I was trying to get at a second ago, and I don't think I really completed my thought fully. So there's today we have social media, but in the past there was media, and it's just wild how media can, by what they choose to report or not report, for somehow Jesse James becomes this is viewed as a hero, and someone like Robert Ford, who arguably justifiably executed him, executed Jesse James, like he's the bad guy somehow in the court of public opinion.
Yeah, I think that's part of what the movie is saying, though, too, is that the myth is going to transcend the reality.
Yeah,
Like,
even if it makes no sense.
yeah, even if it makes no sense, it's almost like the myth has a logic of its own, and I think that's kind of where the parts of like it almost has this otherworldly quality to it when you take in like the score and the cinematography and everything weave together. It's kind of like poetic tapestry. Um,
Hmm.
and like especially when you get to the actual assassination part at the end, it's almost like it's like a resignation to fate, right? It's like you know, the way it's executed is like he's basically committing suicide, but the way it comes off is just almost like he knows it's the end, and they're all just. It's a very odd scene actually when you really watch it and just pay attention to the details. Everyone is just kind of like following through something that they know is inevitable.
Oh, the actual
The actual
execution assassination scene.
yeah, the actual assassination scene. It's very odd. It's everyone is kind of like just like almost exhaustively um, resigning themselves to fate.
Yeah, I read one review. I don't remember who it was. I think it was sort of a bigger critic, a well-known critic, but they were in their review were saying something to the effect of like, James knew that his run was over. Basically, he he had lost sort of cooperation of the gang because he was so paranoid, and
Yeah,
it sounded like he had some like physical ailments as well, and he knew kind of his robbing days were over, and instead of instead of letting the law get him, it was preferable to him to let one of his guys take him out, and so he could just go down as a as not a martyr, but
yeah. That rather than let the law get you, that no, that makes perfect sense. Um,
yeah.
which is consistent with this. Yeah, that's interesting. The myth has its own sort of logic. Um, and it almost, this also kind of reminds me of there's a quote where I can't remember one of the French directors. Well, who knows who that is? But basically, it's kind of the same thing with what is it about like anti-war films? Like, there's no such thing as an anti-war film
Yeah.
because basically the requirements of movie making force you to basically make stuff look cool, and you have to have, and you'll just naturally like show characters exhibiting bravery or honor and just admirable qualities, and so like it's basically impossible to make a truly anti-war film. um yeah, I think there's kind of like a similar logic there with the myth making and deconstruction point. It's almost impossible, although you see this in a lot of reviews, to say, oh, this is deconstructing the Western myth. Well, like consider what you just said about, Jesse James and Robert Ford and the acting jobs. In some sense, it's almost reifying it. It's reaffirming it, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, and sort of like you see this, and another interesting one is Unforgiven, where I think there is even a better claim there, where especially for the first 99% of the movie, where Clint Eastwood is deconstructing the Western, but he almost like reassembles it in this like final purified superhuman form at the end
Yeah.
when when he just he stands at the rainy doorway to avenge his friend
Takes
that
out the
was
whole town.
killed.
Yeah.
Yeah, and goes in there and has that like epic line of like deserves got nothing to do with it, right? Where I think there's some kind of similarity there where it's like you can't really deconstruct the Western myth. Is in the same way you can't really make an anti-war film.
Mm. Um, and this is this is my typical like you know how Trump had the he has the weave, you know, he like talks about one thing for a while, moves on,
Yeah, yeah,
and he does like these I don't know if you'd call it recursive. He just goes down a couple of layers and he starts coming back to the previous layers. I do this all the time in my conversation. So I'm now going back to this parasocial thing, which we've touched on it a few times, but I was just remembering like parts of this were reminding me of like the Cable Guy. Yeah, have you seen the Cable Guy, the Jim Carrey movie?
yeah. It's been a while, but yeah, that was
But like
hilarious.
a similar thing where, and
It
that's like the thing
is.
you were saying about with the zero HP thing. Like people can turn on their heroes very quickly if they meet them and then start to feel like they're not being validated by them or something, or that they're not living up to the myth they made for them. It's like I just wanted to be a friend. I just wanted to give you everything, and you didn't accept me or didn't accept my offering, and so now I have to hurt you.
Yeah, 100%. That's beautifully said.
Or
And,
like a
and if you want to,
spurned lover thing too. Like
yeah, it is. And if you want to loop this back around even to earlier conversation, it's about why people walked out of the theater. There is something deep there about when your expectation, a mismatch between expectations and reality. And yeah, I think the, the Cable Guy actually is a hilarious comparison because there is
yeah,
something, yeah, about the unrequited part of the relationship that really harms your sense of worth and your identity to the core, and makes that gets expressed in some pretty destructive
and
ways.
this movie doesn't. They don't go as far. Let's just say, if they made this now, almost 20 years later, 15, 16 years later, instead of so there's a bit of I don't want to put this in there. I don't want to like put this on the movie on Andrew Dominic or whatever,
Yeah.
but there's a bit of a gay undertone, and if they made it now, they would have amped that up by a lot. And
Yeah.
but there is this thing where there's this part where there's two parts kind of. So at one part, Jesse James, I think he's gone off to church with his family or something, and Robert stays back at the house, and he's like going through Jesse's things, and I think he even smells the pillow or something like that.
Yeah.
And in reference, he's like it smells of talcum and lavender, which is funny that that word lavender would be in there too. And then he also walks in on him like having a bath at one part too, and they have this weird conversation. But that's about it. But I think yeah, if they make this movie now, they would have amped that stuff up. They would have had some scenes of Robert like spying on him naked or
Yeah,
something.
yeah. No, they excuse me. No, I think they put that in to just the right amount. I don't think it's actually homosexual undertones. Um, I was thinking about this, and this sounds weird, but it's almost like there's an element of possession in those kind of parasocial or just
Yeah.
deep admiration
Oh,
for someone.
did you see the bike riders?
No, no, that's on my list.
It's a bit. There's a bit of that going. There was people there going like, "Oh, this is clearly a gay allegory," and then I watched it. I was like, "It's not." But there is. I mean, there's an element to that. I mean, I guess there's but it's the possessive thing. Like one of the older bikers like wants to possess this younger guy. Like sees him as the up and coming, maybe himself as a younger form or something. But
Yeah, there is something um, slightly gay, but not actually gay. I think about that deep level of admiration for someone, right?
yeah,
That there's an element of possession. Yeah, I think that's right. I don't
well,
think
and
it's actually.
the wife really hates Robert too. Like that's
Yeah,
also
yeah,
you see that in some of these like those gay sort of things where it's like her hatred is rooted in some sort of unspoken like
yeah,
acknowledgement that you're like trying to take my husband or something.
yeah. God help us with that. Yeah, yeah. I think you're right. If that was made today, that yeah, that would have been like the major focus of. Oh, we haven't talked about the score either.
Oh yeah, let's talk about the I think it's Nick Cave, right?
Yeah, I don't think this movie is would be what it is without the score. I like. What else did Nick Cave do besides this
Well,
movie?
he did that movie I just did,
The
the
Proposition. That's right.
Proposition, which
Yeah, that was
he
it.
wrote that movie too.
He wrote the Proposition.
Yeah, I think yeah he wrote the script and then he did
I did
the
not know that.
music.
That's interesting.
He appears in Jesse James.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. He's the guy singing the song at the end.
Mm.
Yeah, but no, the score is beautiful, and that's one of the reasons. Again, I sing the praises of this movie so often is that it's firing on all cylinders of all these elements. Right? I think it's arguably got one of the best scores of the 21st century, some of the best acting, certainly some of the best cinematography, some of the best narrative drama. And yeah, it's rare to find every single element like that. But yeah, I don't think this movie gets pulled together like it does without such a beautiful score by Nick Cave. The Proposition score was it was weird, but it really worked for that movie. But yeah, um, the score really helped with a bunch of the transitions and the moods and setting the tone and all
Yeah,
that.
it gives it a prestige feel. I mean, it already has this prestige feel because the camera work, but it's something I don't exactly know how this works when you're making a movie too, because it's like we're making this big movie and we need to have good music, and but to me it doesn't. It's like, is that something you can just choose? Like, but it shouldn't. It's like making good music is seems really hard to me, and so it's interesting to me that someone can like rise to the occasion and like, oh, we have this great movie, we need great score, and they're able to do it. It needed a kind of a prestige sound, and it got it.
Yeah, it's actually it's actually mind blowing that he could pull it off. Right? It's like hard to imagine the movie without also imagining the score.
Because
Um,
it's not something where you can just like throw more money at. Like,
yeah, yeah, he has to get it right, or else almost nothing works. Like it might have still been a good movie, but yeah, the movie completely loses its tone and quality. I think without that exact score.
yeah, was this one of the last times that Jeremy Renner tried to do something serious?
Oh, I almost forgot that was Jeremy Renner. Yeah, it was. I don't know because no, because he was in the Hurt Locker shortly after that.
That was within the same couple years, right?
Yeah, yeah, similar time frame.
Yeah, it seems like the last 10 years or so, though, he kind of just he did Marvel, and he was sort of like, oh, he did Wind River, which is pretty serious.
Yeah, he was on an upward trajectory, and then kind of yeah, we were talking about McConaughey too. Some people have had these weird trajectories where you think they're just going to launch like a rocket ship and just kind of fizzle out or don't do as much as you think.
Yeah, I guess he's in some TV show now, Mayor of Kingstown, which I've not seen, but I don't know. But it seemed like for like 10 years, he just sort of like stopped trying to like
Yeah.
acting, and was just doing like goofy roles. But and he's not he's not bad in this, but he's not like as good as maybe the others.
No, you know who I really liked? The Dick Little character with a D, right?
Yeah, Paul. Yeah, Paul Schneider. I think. Yeah,
Yeah, I was like entranced by his character this time. I thought he was
yeah. That
great.
guy. I feel like that guy kind of disappeared. He was in a bunch of like indie movies in the early 2000s. He was on some like TV shows, but I don't know what happened to him. Yeah, most of when you go to IMDb, there's like the known for section.
Yeah.
All of his stuff is 2009, or his four examples are 2009 and earlier. Yeah, he feels like a guy who got lost to the 2000s. He still does lots of stuff, but like not high profile.
Yeah, because he has like a really remarkable, like rememberable face, but at the same time, I can't place him in anything.
I think he's kind of in that like Paul Rudd zone where he's supposed to be like funny and handsome at the same time, but like other funny handsome guys came along. So,
Yeah.
and of course, one of the best,
Sam Rockwell.
Sam Rockwell. Yeah, he's great in
Yeah.
this too.
Yeah. You know what's interesting also? I was thinking about in terms of the myth making aspect of the West and Outlaws, like it's hard. In some ways, it's similar to celebrity culture, right? Especially
Mm-hmm.
back then, because a lot of it was centered on violence. Like, generals would generally and military commanders would be a lot of the celebrities and people who the Eastern newspapers would be obsessed with back then. Um, but in terms of an actual outlaw, I'm trying to think that's kind of weird to think about because does that really have an analog today? You know, I was thinking that it almost didn't until you brought up the guy. who murdered the UHC executive.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, and you saw the reaction to that, right? Like, it's kind of shocking in some sense, but also not shocking. Um, I just can't think of any kind of analogs to someone who would be famous for, but also cheered on for committing crimes. If that makes sense.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it's we don't do we have outlaws now? It's a good question. I mean, we do. Yeah, it's kind of weird. This assassin guy in New York, he's like
Trump is kind of an outlaw, actually.
yeah.
Yeah, I like that. He actually kind of fits. Like his popularity, I'm sure, rose when he
Yeah,
when he got charged.
he's like a rule breaker. But this New York guy is interesting. People this has been a funny react or weird reaction. I mean, I'm not I'm not one to like scold people for like making jokes about someone who died,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
it's a little it's like been a little it's like people are like making a lot of jokes and it's kind of like
yeah. Like you think like nothing. You think like nothing would shock you. Like I'm still kind of shocked. Um,
kind of a big leftist thing, right? And you know what the thing is, we don't. I mean, the guy did write apparently some weird sort of note on some of the shell casings, which
yeah, apparently it was like a book that's by a same or similar name
yeah,
about like healthcare like denial, coverage denial or something.
yeah,
I don't know.
it implies that it was something about denying claims, but it might not be. It might be something
Yeah,
weirder than that, or something just different. The guy could just be crazy, like so. You see all
yeah,
you see all these leftists who are like celebrating it. Like, what if we find out this guy is not a leftist? Or like,
yeah.
what if we find out his motivation is totally weird? Like, or he's actually working for a rival capitalist enterprise or something like that.
Right. It'll be really interesting first if they really catch him because the picture they're showing right now that doesn't look like the same guy in terms of like the hoodie and stuff like that. Maybe he
Yeah.
changed clothes and they have reason to know that's really him. I have no idea. But where was I going with that?
Well, just that we don't know who he is and we don't really know his motivation. People are like celebrating it, but
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I know where I was going with this. Yeah. Because it makes me think of like these discussions would come up a lot. I know the motivations aren't the same, but spree shooters, right?
uh huh,
Um, spree shooters, and this relates to obviously the Robert Ford character too. They say, really have strong desires for notoriety.
yeah,
Um, and that's like a major motivation. But so in some sense, it's always been a little bit weird that that their targets are like really helpless, like public spaces and just, people who are very, obviously very
yeah.
innocent, right?
Schools, yeah, they go to.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's very strange that yeah, they would go to a school and not pick some random like unpopular institution in society, whether it's
that's exactly where I was going with it. And
yeah,
so it makes you think, like, right? Because if their goal is notoriety, I think it would actually shock society to its core. With we're getting a little bit of a preview that if someone actually went after like really unpopular institutions, how many people would cheer it on? I think that would probably genuinely shock people. Like we're getting a little bit of a preview now of how many people will not only straight up cheer but post pictures of like other major healthcare CEO
yeah, yeah.
healthcare CEOs. Like,
Wasn't it
yeah,
who wasn't it like someone for Taylor Lorenz? She's
Taylor Enns, yeah, she and a bunch of leftists were doing that and reposting it and
it's really. I mean, like
everything.
2 weeks ago, did she get fired from Washington Post or did she leave or something?
I
Anyway,
don't know, I don't know the details,
either
but
today or 2 weeks ago, she worked at the Washington Post and she's like posting like these like these veiled threats to CEOs of publicly traded companies.
yeah, I mean, just completely deranged. Like you think that leftists won't shock you, but and then something like this happens. I'm like, I don't know why I'm surprised, but it's shocking. And so yeah, that was always an interesting aspect of spree shooters, which I think people have talked about where it's like it is curious why they wouldn't go after yeah, I don't want to.
Yeah, you don't want a Fed post.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know if that goes, but yeah, why they wouldn't go after maybe some more unpopular institutions like you alluded to, and would gain the notoriety and as we're learning, probably get cheered on by a significant fraction of the population.
Well, yeah. I mean, I guess I'm thinking about like unpopular institutions, like Jesse James. Like in my view, had it coming. Like
Yeah,
he's menacing. Like he's going around. He's very menacing. He's freaking everyone out, and it's not like he didn't kill a bunch of people. Cause harm to lots of innocent people too. So, which is again, there's like it is perplexing to me that that Robert Ford was seen as like this loser idiot. I want to talk about the stage play thing. I thought that was I actually think the last like 15 minutes of the middle portion of the movie, I don't think is bad. I think it's very good. But the first like 15 and the last 15 are like incredible.
yeah, yeah,
I think the end is really great. Like sort of more happens in the last 15 minutes than sort of the rest of the movie. Just like Robert's life going on doing the stage show with his brother, and just the way that was filmed is very I don't know, you just feel like you're there in that theater.
yeah.
And there's that intensity of being, and like I'm like rooting for him when the people are calling him a coward and like jumps out there and fights him. Like I don't know, I thought it was cool.
Yeah,
uh,
I was I was surprised how well that last part resonated because in a lot of ways that's the most important part of the movie. And the first time I watched it, I kind of thought of that part as extraneous. And because it's after the assassination, it's just kind of like it felt like movie wrap up for whatever reason. Maybe I was exhausted, whatever. But no, that the movie, it really is the ending there. Like that's
it has new life, new life. Like you think the movie's gonna sort of be over when he shoots Jesse James, but it's there's sort of a second wind.
Yeah, yeah, and that, and again, to wrap around into the Western myth, a lot like I think Sitting Bull. I don't quote me on that, but yeah, I know Buffalo Bill, and a lot of like the Western characters were paid to do these like road shows back east, and they or just travel around the country to do these reenactments. So those reenactments were actually like a really huge deal in retelling a lot of like the famous dramas of the West, like often like not long after the event occurred. So it's like
Yeah,
not not long after something would happen, people back in the East they just couldn't get enough of this stuff in the Eastern newspapers, and then they would do road shows like Buffalo Bill and one of the big it might not have been Sitting Bull or I think it was, but I'll have to check. Yeah, what and they would just be kind of I don't want to say debase themselves, but do these kind of reenactments of the drama.
should Kyle Rittenhouse have done a tour, a
Yeah,
reenactment tour?
yeah. You got to do the grift, right? He should have done the Fox News or whatever the equivalent would be today.
Well, the equivalent now is kind of what he went and
The podcast.
spoke at conferences. Yeah, he probably did
Oh
paid
yeah,
podcast appearances, but like imagine him going like a stadium tour where he like recreates the shootings.
yeah, yeah. That would actually be I would pay to see that. So that
Yeah,
would be a good idea.
50 theater North American tour, Kyle Rittenhouse shooting pedophiles.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
And then they could do it with like a like overly dramatic stage drama, like like
yeah,
like yelping at the when the shot happens and everything. But yeah, no, that would be hilarious. But
yeah, and I think he says that he said like by his own count he had done it 800 times. Like so, and it seems like he got wealthy off of this.
yeah, yeah,
Kind of like writing a book or whatever once you do serve your time or something.
yeah, you could really cash in. So those were a huge part of reinforcing a lot of the Western myths. I think some of the Custer battles were reenacted in some of the and some of the stage shows. So yeah, those were a huge part. And then yeah, it really wrapped up his character well. And the ending just really was a gut punch, man. It was just really sad. I just yeah, watching the movie again, it just really hard not to identify the Robert Ford character. His acting just did such a great job. And then the ending was just really tragic. That
Yeah, that guy. And so yeah, there's sort of like a second movie at the end, and it's like the assassination of Robert Ford by the coward
Yeah.
Edward O'Kelly, I
Yeah.
think is his name.
Except none of it matters. None of it's consequential. Nobody, we don't even know the names of the guy.
That guy
Can't
didn't
remember the
even know.
names.
That guy didn't know Robert Ford.
No.
I'm get there. I mean, I didn't read into it. I
Yeah.
didn't read the history about it. But was he just like a fanboy of Jesse James or something? Like what? Like,
I honestly don't know the real history. I think he was just someone who was just, got caught up in the.
and so that guy was given a pardon.
Yeah, yeah. I found that all fascinating too about the public sentiment, where that yeah that guy was given a pardon, and everyone was basically rooting for that guy to kill Robert Ford. Um,
And
yeah, so
then I
someone
did see. I
with
looked at his Wikipedia. He ended up dying like 10 years later or something in a shootout with the cops. Anyway,
interesting. Yeah,
yeah.
but that whole end part was it was kind of a speed run of his own assassination, except very tragically. Uh, nobody cared. Nobody remembers the guy's names. There was no eulogies for Bob as it goes. Um,
He
yeah,
does get to
and
marry some hot like burlesque dancer though.
yeah, Zoe Deschanel.
Yeah. They portray it as if she's one of the a big performer of the era. I don't know if that was true,
Oh,
but
huh. Yeah, yeah, but he died just complete. You know,
I think he was only 30. Yeah.
yeah, nobody caring for him. No, yeah, so I think the ending really hit hard.
Yeah. All right. Let me see what else I got here. Oh yeah. I mean, so yeah. So he dies, and this thing I'm interested in. I read this book. Do you know Chuck Klosterman or Klosterman?
Sounds familiar,
He's
but
like
no.
a cultural critic, sort of. I don't know. Pop culture. He writes a lot about pop culture and stuff. But he had this book. I think it was called "But What If We're Wrong," and he talks a lot about like how we like what gets remembered, and like what gets remembered in popular culture is not always what was actually popular.
Yeah,
Like so it's like plausible that in like 100 years from now, like the music that people know about from the 2020s or the 2000s or something isn't necessarily like the music everyone was listening to, or
yeah,
basically it might surprise us. So it's kind of interesting that Jesse James has lived on. Like everyone's like well, I don't know about younger people, but people still know that name, and they kind of they hear it, they know he was an outlaw of the era. But and at the time, it sounds like everyone knew who Robert Ford was as well. But no one like until this. If it wasn't for this movie, I would probably have no idea uh, who he was, unless I had explicitly been reading about it. Uh,
yeah. Sorry, again.
oh, well, it's just weird that you can't really predict. You don't really know what's going to have like staying power, or like what's going to become like a meme or not, or a meme or a myth, or however you want to refer to it. But yeah, you don't exactly like. I think you said this something earlier. Like these things take on a life of their own, and you just don't really get a say in. Even the official like keepers of records and stuff don't necessarily get a say in what gets remembered.
Yeah, that's the part that I was talking about earlier. Yeah, exactly. That the myth making aspect has a logic of its own, and that's kind of where it tied into their resignation to fate at the end with the actual assassination, and especially everything after that we were just talking about with the reenactments and stuff like that, where I think there's a little bit of a misinterpretation of the film when you see some of the, if you've watched any of the analyses or read some reviews where they're like, oh, it's a deconstruction of the Western myth. It's like, no, it's actually about the utter and complete triumph of the myth making process over what's real. The film very like clearly showed you this contrast and like, on through this like shattered, unfocused lens, the tragic underbelly and the reality of the flawed human character versus the myth and the man and all his flaws and stuff like that. And then their resignation to fate at the end is was a really important point in the movie, because this isn't a deconstruction of it. It's showing the actual transcendent power of the myth to actually go above and beyond all of that, what may have been real or what may have not, and just completely cement itself with its own logic and life of its own. And really kind of this transcendent process.
Yeah,
That book sounds really interesting though.
yeah. Okay, I think I'll wrap up like the actual movie discussion right there. But one thing I wanted to ask is about the director Andrew Dominic. Like, how did things play out for him if this had been more of a hit and had maybe like won a couple more, won some more awards or something? Because from after this, he's made like two or three features in like a long in almost 20 years. He made this movie Blonde about Marilyn Monroe that came out on Netflix a couple years ago that I've not seen. I've actually heard from people I trust that it's actually quite good, but
Hmm.
it got it got sort of blackballed by the press because it portrays Marilyn Monroe as very regretful about like her abortions or something like that.
Hmm.
And so people are like, well, the film media was like, hey, this is we don't want a pro life movie or whatever, so that people were mad about it.
I've yeah, I sorry, were you finished?
But just like where does his career? I know that's it. Like that's like kind of the last thing he's done, and that was a few years ago. And he's really not made very many movies. He's kind of done like two documentaries about Nick Cave or something like that. And it's like, um, but he seems like a premier. Could be a premier filmmaker. It's just I don't know if it's because this one didn't hit or because he just doesn't want to do it. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know actually. I remember at the time I was so impressed with this movie that I ended up looking into the director and was kind of relatively unimpressed with other stuff he's done. I don't even know if I watched any of his other movies. I just didn't seem that interested. I was like, man, was this a one-hit wonder? Kind of to your point. Maybe if he had got more funding, that would allow more freedom going forward. But was it? I think there's a movie Chopper.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, he did Chopper.
Yeah, so I don't know if there's even any commonalities in the films he directed. I mean, I guess you could say that the Marilyn Monroe one is also about fame and celebrity. Um, but yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I honestly don't know. Because I was honestly interested with how good this one was, but yeah, I didn't really find anything that seemed of interest beyond. But so the abortion point's interesting though. I would actually disagree with this a little bit. I think that this is one of the few areas that Hollywood is actually relatively conservative towards. Um, they they can churn out just complete, gay race communist slop,
Yeah,
like just left and right. I mean, they will replace European history with, black lesbians, like whatever. um, their attitudes towards abortion are actually kind of surprisingly conservative. So you may have some counterexamples, but at least that's my impression. When you look at movies like Juno, or I don't have a ton of examples on hand, but I did notice that this is like actually one. I think Guns, maybe Guns too, right?
yeah.
I think that's for obvious reasons. You can't
Oh
like
yeah,
Hollywood can't.
Hollywood's sort of inherently pro Second Amendment,
Yeah,
kind of. At least they believe in good guy with a gun for sure.
yeah.
Um,
It's kind of the war movie. There's no anti-war film problem there. It's like there's just no way Hollywood, no matter even if the people wanted to, can really be anti-gun.
yeah,
But yeah,
I think you're right. The way abortion is usually seen, like it's usually it's seen as a sympathetic or like brave choice for a female protagonist to like keep a baby, or um, it's it's like I don't know. You got like The Godfather, where like Kay aborts a baby, and and
exactly.
she definitely
Yeah,
doesn't look good in that scene. Like,
yeah. No, it's yeah. I don't think you're supposed to. Yeah, I can't remember the exact dialogue, but yeah, she's basically, he gets mad because she killed my son or whatever. I can't remember what the exact
yeah,
dialogue.
yeah, it's yeah. No, you're right. You're right on this. It's just I think in that Blonde movie. So I know what they did. I haven't seen it, but I'd seen those clips. People shared them on Twitter. They like showed the baby, the embryo or whatever, like, and like I think the baby like talks and is sort of like mom,
Hmm.
like what which is sort of like those like
Oh,
which is sort of like those like comics or like those like
yeah,
that
yeah,
you'd see in like a Christian magazine or something. Like they'd be
yeah.
like mom, why'd you kill me, sort of thing. Like I think they kind of have that in the movie, and so that like
Okay,
really
yeah.
pissed off that kind of person who gets pissed off about that sort of thing. So
Yeah,
uh,
that may make sense. When yeah, if you frame it like that. But yeah, I think the attitudes towards abortion generally kind of surprise me. They're rarely flippant. Yeah, about actual abortions. There's some exceptions I've noticed where like there's this like independent Romanian film where girls are like sneaking to get abortions back 10 years ago or something like that. When there's an
yeah,
abortion law, but it was like really I wouldn't call it. It's not anywhere close to like a Hollywood film. It was like it's some independent Romanian movie or whatever. It won
yeah.
a bunch of awards, but yeah, I think in general when you look at like the major Hollywood films, they're guns and abortion. I think they're relatively conservative on.
On that, on sort of related to that topic, it's actually kind of interesting in the assassination of Jesse James that there's not really like there's no women. I mean, there are women in the movie, like but Jesse James himself seems, at least the way they portray it in the movie. Maybe I mean, there's only so much they can get into in the movie, but they don't portray him as a womanizer or anything. He seems happy with his like family, and Robert Ford is not going off until the end, and seemingly has this like reasonably like wholesome little relationship. So I don't know if the James gang just like wasn't womanizers or they just didn't have time for that in the movie, but that's something I noticed.
Yeah, that is a good point. Yeah, maybe it's in the four
There's
hour
the
four
one guy
hour.
who goes off and gets in trouble for hooking up with some other guy's wife, but
Yeah,
um,
Dick Little, and that gunplay was weird too. Wait, when they got in the shootout, but
yeah, but they can't shoot each other from a couple of feet away. But
yeah, yeah, but no, that yeah, I think there was really very muted interactions with women in general, other than that one. Not even a sex scene, just she blows out the candle.
yeah,
But yeah,
um, yeah, and then all right, yeah, yeah. So I don't think I have anything else I wanted to get into the movie. I mean, I strongly recommend it. Oh, I did want to point out one thing. Charlie Ford shoots himself in the heart because nowadays people don't shoot themselves in the heart; they shoot themselves in the head. And I was wondering if that was a thing from the era where it's like because back then people probably thought more of their like maybe more of their like reasoning and stuff was in their heart, like they were maybe, whereas now everyone lives in their head. I was wondering if that was a thing back then, like.
yeah, I honestly don't know. It's almost like somewhere in between, the Roman method of splitting your own gut open and
Yeah,
just
because
blowing your
they used to think more about your bowels and your gut, like as being a
yeah.
source of like where your thoughts are coming from. Where now we just think of our head, only our head.
Yeah, yeah, that's an interesting point. There may be something to that. But yeah, it's the film had a bunch of like kind of odd details like that, where the historical accuracy seemed really interesting, like really minor things. But
Well, and they had the writer of the so it's based on a book, which is sort of like a historic. I don't know if it's a dramatization of history, but the book, and they had the author like as part of the production group, like consulting or whatever.
interesting, yeah, I wish they would do say more of that with recent films, because they obviously did a good job. And then some other final thoughts. I really, you know, the older I get, the more I realize that, I think about the differences of seeing something in the theater versus like your laptop or whatever. Um, and it's interesting that I used to think that, it's the big budget action movies that are the biggest difference, seeing in the theater. And it's so interesting. I think it's almost the inverse now, where a bunch of like, even like David Lynch movies, a bunch of like the art house movies and really great films have such good cinematography and sound design and like little nuances that the difference between seeing them in the theater and even just like on a home TV setup are really large. And it's almost like I've kind of gone to the inverse of caring about saying like action movies on a big screen, where it's like no, it's like the more artistic films are actually have the bigger differential between seeing them on like a proper setup with good like surround sound speakers and everything versus just at home on your laptop, right? Like
Yeah,
even something like David Lynch, it's like it's so experiential. um that it's like the surround sound, the visuals, and everything. Like it's so experiential that it's really important to have a proper setup there. And then I saw Sicario recently with surround sound, and oh my goodness, the sound design and music and score on that is so incredible. Like it's almost like a crime to watch that without proper surround sound. Um, but yeah, I thought that's interesting that I've
Yeah,
kind of
saw
180
that
on
with
that.
saw that with Oppenheimer. Like there's one part of Oppenheimer where I guess everyone thought like, well, I need to go see it in IMAX because it's gonna be a big bomb, and they did have the big bomb, and it was cool to see that in IMAX. But the rest of it is 3 hours of just like good sound design and like nice settings and close-ups of people's faces while they're talking.
Yeah,
And it's still, but it was still very satisfying to see that in a large format.
yeah, it really is. Like I'm like stunned when you see just kind of the cinematography shots from Oppenheimer. Like they're awesome. I mean, like some of the stills that you draw. Yeah, so I thought that was interesting. I've kind of like 180'd on that, where it's like, no, it's almost the less, you know, lower action, more artistic movies that can benefit the most from proper setups.
Yeah. I wanted to give one. Okay, so there's one thing. There's Garrett Dillahunt. His character's name like Ed Miller or something. He's also in No Country for Old Men, so he was in those two movies from that year.
Oh wow.
Um,
Wait, who is he? Oh, he was the other, yeah, the sheriff
yeah,
sidekick. Yeah.
and then I don't know if you know. Do you know who James Carville is?
Yeah,
James,
yeah. Yeah, he was
he was the governor
yeah.
in this movie, and that's
Yeah,
kind of
he did a good job. Like,
well, yeah. They have this sort of like take that I mean, there is a difference between a good actor and a bad actor and all that, but a lot of acting just comes down to, in my opinion, film acting seems to just come down to like your voice and your look,
yeah.
and like it doesn't matter how much time you spent, at the film school or whatever they call it, theater school or whatever. Like if you have the voice and the look, you can have a good part in a movie, and
Yeah. I think there's probably something to that, right? Especially like outside of like the very few I've come to like this almost like Pareto rule of acting where it's like to your point, it's like 90% of it is just that, right? Like, you know, Ryan Gosling is, you know, uh not
he
disgusting.
just
Yeah,
looks a
he's
certain way.
yeah, he looks cool. He's a good looking guy. He's got a good voice, and yeah. Outside of like the very few roles that are like truly, transcendent, like some Marlon Brando roles or Daniel Day-Lewis or whatever. And it's almost like a rule where, uh, you know, the really great acting jobs are where they can just completely almost lose themselves as a uh, actor into the character, like Colonel Kurtz in Apocalypse Now, or I'm drawing some blanks. Yeah, some of the Daniel Day Lewis roles where he's almost like and There Will Be Blood. It's like he's almost not Daniel Day Lewis, right? It's almost like a form of insanity where he's just so completely submersed himself in this role that he's not the actor anymore. I think beyond like the handful or few dozen or so examples of those like truly great acting roles, I think you're onto something. It's probably like 90% that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think I'll wrap it up there. Unless you got anything you want to push out there, I mean, people should go follow your account. Anything else?
No, I think that's it.
Well, thanks a lot for joining. Everyone, yeah, go watch Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford. I think he's more of a hero by the hero Robert Ford. But
Yeah.
all right, thanks a lot. We'll talk to you later.
Well, thanks for having me.